are here to make your weekend even more exciting, right? So, yeah, welcome to the very first episode of Finex Insights by Finex Skills Hub. Here we are going to dig through numbers. As analysts as we are going to be digging through numbers and bringing insights out, okay? So what's a better way to start this episode than to look at the election numbers, especially since in Ghana here we went through our elections to get a new leader for the next 4 years on 7th December. So quickly we'll run through some insights we gleaned from this exercise, and then if you have any questions, we take them. Okay, so I'm doing this with Bernard. Bernard is the lead trainer and data analyst here at Finex Skills Hub. So Bernard has over 10 years experience in data analysis. So we are looking forward to exciting things together. Hello, Bernard, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Glad to be here.
Great. Without wasting much time, Bernard, please give us some opening remarks and then let's zoom in into what we have to do for today.
Okay.
Why are we here?
Why are we here? Finance Skills Hub is a data analytics financial modeling community. So we've decided that one of the ways that we can improve learning, that is help people use Microsoft Power BI, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint for storytelling, is to relate the things that we teach, right? So in this first episode of Finex Insights, we want to take a case study on Ghana's elections, go behind the numbers, and then see the stories or the patterns in there. We'll also give users insights on how we created the Power BI report on Ghana's elections, and then also go through some interesting slides. So it's packed and it's interactive. So I'm sure with 9 in the seats, we are going to have a very exciting session.
Yes, and a smooth one as well. So before Bernard starts, if you have any questions, you could put it in the chat box or just give us a raise of hand and you would be called. Thank you. So Bernard, can you, before we even start anything, can you take us through how the election numbers have been looking since the historical figures, basically? So just quickly take us through that.
Okay, so I think before we even tell any story, it's important you go into the past to get a sense of what was. Then we build on that to get some insights on what is and what is likely to be, right? In learning, we call this descriptive analytics, where we just take historical data. So for Ghana, we are looking at this through the lens of the Fourth Republic, right? At least in the Fourth Republic, that is where, if you like, we really had democracy, okay, in its current form, right? So we want to step back and look at the previous election. This is just 2020. So if you look at Ghana's election, you know that it's basically a two-horse race, right? So we know color blue, we know color green, green for NDC, blue for NPP. And since 1992, these two parties have played dominant roles in every election up to 2024. So using 2020 as a base case, just to take us back, in fact, NPP won that election, but they had a good run from the NDC. So 47.4% against 51.3%. For most of our elections, this is how it looks like, right? And usually they leave about 2% for the other parties to share. I'm sure Ghanaians are always looking for the third force, but maybe it will happen. But in the data that we've seen so far, the third force is a very long shot away because over 98% of Ghanaians vote for MPP and NDC in the last election since 1992, right? So if you look at the last election, only 1.3% was shared among the rest. This is 2020. We look at 2024, but I'm just using this as a base case to introduce you to the colors. That's the blue and the green. That 1.3% was shared by these candidates and parties, right? So Ghana Union Movement and then the rest took the 1.3%. Now, we are using this as a base case to help us go back into time since 1992. You realize that in terms of the shape, the colors, the blue and the green, nothing much has changed. Okay, so from the person I like to call Chairman Rawlings, because he was then the chairman of the PNDC, right, decided to take Ghana along the democratic way in 1992. So Ghana's first election was in 1992. And this he won comfortably, well, amidst all the issues, but this was a 58.3% win for the NDC and a 30.40% for the MPP. This was then a Dubois against Rawlings in 1992. You see that even though the blue and green are still dominant, in 1992, there was still a very strong third force. So the likes of PNC, CPP were all very active. Okay, so this is where the story began. Then in 1996, this was second round or second term for Chairman Rawlings, but this time round, the NPP changed candidates. So this was Kufuor's first time running against Chairman Rawlings. So again, Rawlings won comfortably, a 57% over. But here is where it gets interesting because it is starting to turn into that two-horse race that we've come to know. So in 1996, again, NDC wins. But Kufuor is making a first-time appearance in 1996. So he loses this one, but makes a comeback because in 2000, that was in the first round, there was a change in candidates. And this is very critical because changing candidates has a historical element in our elections, right? So for the first time, Ghanaians were not seeing the face of Chairman Rawlings, that's Jerry John Rawlings, but in place was the vice president, John Evans Atta Mills, right? So Atta Mills now stood against Donald Kufuor, who was making a comeback. So this was a second time, right? In the first round, nobody was able to cross the 50% line. So we had to go for a second round. Now, in that second round, this is where NPP won for the first time with a 56.90%. And NDC had 43.10%. So in terms of our fourth republic, this is the first time we've seen a democratic transition, right? Where one incumbent is now handing over power to an opposition leader. And this was remarkable because it actually brought Ghana to the front. People really were impressed that Ghana could come from the coup days to actually have this smooth transition. So that was Kufuor's first win for the MPP. In second term, he did it comfortably again. Again, the blue and green color still being dominant. So you will notice that in the second term, the performance wasn't as good as the first round, but he won. So again, between 2004 and 2008, there's another transition. Now, this time round, Kufuor finishes a second term. Atta Mills is now making a third appearance, okay, but with a new candidate in the name of Nana Akufo-Addo in 2008. Again, just as happened in 2001, we now have a situation where both parties are not able to cross the 50% plus one mark. So we had to go for a round two. Now, this round two, it must be said that the difference was under 60,000. Okay, so in round 2, NDC wins this marginally, 50.2%, and then Nana Akufo-Addo's NPP has 49.80%. Right. So again, we see another transition, NPP giving power to NDC. So this was another exciting period in 2008. Then, unfortunately, in 2008, John Evans Atta Mills didn't finish his term. Fortunately, he died, and he now had to be succeeded by his vice president, John Mahama, who now comes in to complete the unexpired term and then runs again for president. Okay, so he comes in 2012 and wins marginally against Akufo-Addo, who is making a second comeback, right? So, I mean, this election had its own issues. It was the first time we had to go to court to resolve issues from presidential elections, and it was an eye-opener. At least a lot of people got interested in our elections. People got to know the ins and outs of our elections. Then in 2016, again, we see another transition from one party to another. So this time around, MPP comes in and then wins the 2016 election. Okay, again, Akufo-Addo, being resilient here, comes in to win the 2016, 44% against 53. Okay, then in 2020, that's the second term for Akufo-Addo. He comes in and then wins it for the second time. Right. So it's been a mix of transitions, it's a mix of resilience, people coming in second and third time. Okay. There are also outliers, with John Mahama being the only candidate apart from Rawlings to win it for the first time. Right. So in terms of our history, this has been Ghana's history of elections since 1992 to date.
Thank you, Bernard. That's very interesting. So once you were presenting, I made some interesting observations. I realized that in the 2000 runoff, the MPP comes in to sort of close the gap that the other parties were given. So the vote from the other party sort of went to the MPP. But it's a different case in 2008 runoffs. So you see that the MPP are still around the same percentage, and then NDC rather comes in to take the votes from the other parties. Well, we have just 2 runoffs to work with, so I don't think that can give us some really deep insights, right? So let's just quickly move on to the next thing. Ben, with what we've said so far, assuming I'm a party strategist, what should I be looking out for with the trends we've seen from 92 to 2020 before we look at the 2024 figures? So let's assume that I'm a party strategist hoping for my party to win the 2024 elections. What do I need to look out for?
Well, I mean, in the business world, we call this business intelligence. Okay, how do you rally or use historical data to inform your decisions? It's the same thing with elections as well. So, rightly said, if I'm a party strategist, what does this tell me? Well, from Ghana's elections, we learned 3 things. 3 things. That if you're a party strategist, if you're able to keep these 3 variables right, I'm going to go through the 3 variables. The first one is keep your eye on the central region. Okay, and I'm going to tell you why. Because consistently, this region in Ghana always has it right. Right? We are not too sure whether it is the demography or it's just the social elements, the dynamics in there always seem to predict who is likely to win the election. Now, so if you're a party strategist, you probably want to test how you are going to fare in the elections with the central region. And laying this with what has happened since 1992, they got it right from 92, voting for J.J. Rawlings, 96, again voting for J.J. Rawlings. When it switched to Kufuor, again, they got it right. Okay, so the central region is key. It may not be the only region, but at least since 1992, they've consistently, even if they stand alone, been the region that predicts who eventually is going to be the winner. So maybe as a party strategist, this is one of three variables that you want to pay attention to. So note that, at least from the data, that's what we have seen. Number two, Ashanti region matters, right? Ashanti region matters. The reason we are saying this is that the formula for NDC and NPP cannot be complete without Ashanti region. So for the NPP, the goal is to whip up a lot of votes from the Ashanti region, because what you are seeing here are winning margins. Okay, so this is like net position. When you subtract the NDC votes and then the NPP votes for each region, what is left is what is shown in the green bars. Okay, so you see Volta region giving us 500,000 over, and it's 2020. We'll come to 2024. Upper East, right? There are regions that have been strongholds for the NDC and then the NPP. In the case of NPP, the blue regions consistently has always been the Ashanti region and the Eastern region. Okay. For the NDC, you can talk about the Volta region. Okay. You can talk about some parts of the Northern region. Okay. But for NPP, the constants have always been the Ashanti region and the Eastern region. So the second variable, if you are an election strategist, is that as much as possible for the NPP, make the winning margin in Ashanti region very wide. Because if it is wide, it has the capacity to mop up all the net gains that your opposition brings. Vice versa, if you are in the NDC, this is your goal. Try and shrink that blue bar in the Ashanti region while making sure that the green bars in the areas that you win are wider. Okay. So for either parties, if you are in charge of elections, Ashanti region matters. Shrinking or expanding will go to your advantage or disadvantage. That's point number two. In point number three, if you are an incumbent, know that at the end of your term, you are going to suffer from low turnout. And for some reason, this has been very consistent since 1992. So if I'm taking this back from 1992, in 1996, we saw a huge voter turnout during the second term of Jerry John Rawlings. That's 78.2%. When he was transitioning, that was when he finished his term, right? The election that gave birth to an NPP win, where power changed hands, there was a low voter turnout of 63%, right? Then in NPP's second term, we have 85.1%. Okay, so again, same party retaining power for the second term. Then you notice that when Kufuor finishes and is giving way to Atta Mills in 2008, we fly under 70% again. That's 69.5%. So the pattern continues. In 2012, here we have an NDC second term. Okay, so an NDC second term, that is when John Mahama comes in. It's still the same party, even though Atta Mills is not there. So 79.4%. Okay. Now, the same pattern flying under 70% comes in again in 2016 when NDC loses to NPP, right? So that disease or that virus of low turnout during second term is playing out right here, right? Then in 2020, which is NPP's second term, again, we have above 70%. Okay. Then now I'm bringing in 2024. So in 2024, we now see that same pattern. After second term of NPP, power is now changing hands. And in fact, this low turnout is the lowest on record, right? It maybe will reflect in the winning margin, but if you look at the blue and then the gray bars, this third variable has again been very consistent. So what we have done is that we've picked out what has stayed true since 1992, right? So the fact that central region has been consistent in predicting who will win, okay? The fact that managing Ashanti region would benefit you or will hurt you, and then the fact that in your second term, if you are incumbent, don't take voter apathy for granted, right? So now to answer the question, this is what I would advise any party strategist to look out for.
Okay. Interesting insights. So I think that's the very first time we've seen anything on 2024. So Ben, can we stay on 2024? Let's see how the 2024 figures are looking at like for these three variables. Okay, so please take us through this. Did the party strategists get it right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to know. I mean, most people know what 2024 was, but probably you've not gone behind the numbers. And that's what we have done here. So based on our history, based on our advice to party strategists and what holds true since 1992, this is how 2024 looked like. I am showing you this slide because you already know how 2022 was. You realize that in this case, the NDC strategist gets it right. Okay, if you compare this to what we had earlier, the goal was try and make the green bars wider and then shrink the blue bars, right? So in this case, NDC is not only relying on their stronghold, but for some reason, they're able to rally other regions alongside. Okay, so they succeeded in shrinking the blue bar in the Ashanti region. In fact, further even shrinking the eastern region. So if you look at the net margin for the MPP, which is just close to 700,000, this is totally wiped out by just taking Greater Accra and then the Volta region. Okay, so maybe for the NPP, this is something that they need to take note of, that you may not be able to rely on Ashanti region forever, right? Because it means that if NDC is able to shrink that blue bar and able to get at least 4 regions to come along, right, it is likely that they'll be in a comfortable lead. So in 2024, we see that the margin again from the Ashanti region could not offset that cumulative gain from 13 regions that were won by the Greater Accra region. Now, I use this slide because you already know how 2020 was. But let's dig a bit deeper into the gains and losses for each party. This time around, we just don't want to do 2 years, but we want to do 2016 to 2024, right? And then we'll compare the vote variances between the MPP and the NDC for these 3 elections, right? Now, in 2016, Akufo-Addo wins for the first time, right? But he improves on his 2012 performance. So he actually added almost 500,000 votes, 467,128, right? This is Mahama's loss because in 2012, based on his previous performance, he drops over 800,000 votes. When this happened in Ghana in 2016, this was unprecedented. We had never seen such a winning margin apart from the early days of Rawlings and Eduboahene. Okay, so you see that this was significant. And in fact, at that point, people actually wrote off Mahama, right? But let's see what happens. I'm sure most of you know, but if you look at the numbers, it makes a very interesting story. In 2020, Akufo-Addo wins a second time. He brings 1 million votes extra from 2012. Okay, so this is COVID. So, you know, prior to the elections, We were home with all the COVID rules, but some way, somehow, we managed to pull off the elections, right? Akufo-Addo brings 1 million from his 2012 performance. But this is the story. Now, John Mahama makes a significant comeback. In 2012, this is the man who was in red with almost 1 million votes. He's not able to just wipe that 861,000 away, but the story of the talent, he's able to bring in more than what he was given. Right. In this case, he was not even giving one talent, but he came from a deficit position and then brings 1.5 million. Now, as a data analyst, if something like this happens, I would be interested in 2024 because this is like momentum. Okay. So if you are going into an election with somebody who has been able to wipe the red and then double or almost triple the game in terms of variance, okay, you should be on the lookout. So in 2024, of course, Akufo-Addo has finished his second term. You have to change candidates. So in 2024, Bawumia comes into the scene, and this is what happens. This, just like 2016, we have not seen this before in Ghana. Dropping 2 million votes from your previous performance, again, is unprecedented. Okay, I'm sure NDP is still going through the whys and hows, but this was a very, very, very significant departure from what we've seen in the past. The man Mahama is very steady, right? In terms of his previous performance, he doesn't really gain much. He brings just about 100,000, but it's enough, right? It's enough because if you look at the performance in 2020, he's able to consistently keep his base and then bring in some new voters of about 100,000. Okay, so maybe if you look at the numbers from 2016, 2020, 2024, you see that you don't have to write off Mahama's performance. It's something that is going to stay in our history books for a very long time. So now, just to give you a sense, using this horizontal analysis on how interesting 2016 and 2020, 2024 tell the story.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. So where are the 1.9 million voters? Where are they? Did they not vote at all, or they took it to other parties? Because I'm still in shock, right? I'm still in shock. But for those that just joined us, right, we are here discussing the election figures. So we looked at the historical trend and we are now zooming in 2024. So sit back and enjoy. All right, Bernard. So for 2024, I see here that NPP brings in a new candidate, right?
Yeah.
And it seems this candidate is having quite the struggle. Can we look at the history of new faces? Do first timers really struggle? Do we have data on that? Just take me through that.
Okay. So this is the data we've put together on new candidates. I'm sure if MDP sits down, there are a mix of reasons why they lost. It may not be one, right? Economy, apathy, new candidates, all these are in the portfolio. But because you asked on the performance of new candidates, this is the chart that we have to show that. As I mentioned, Rawlings is a special case. So we'll take him out of this analysis. If you take him out, Mahama is the only candidate to win an election on their first attempt. Now, you need to put this in context because prior to this, Kufuor struggled. In fact, he came in 96 and then won in 2000. So he failed once. Atta Mills failed twice before winning in 2008. Somebody would argue that what would probably make Mahama's case special was that he was actually caught in the unexpired term of John Evans Atta Mills, who sadly passed away. So you can argue that there was probably a bit more sympathy votes for him. Okay, maybe if I isolate that, then he may or could have suffered the same fate. Okay, so we may treat it as an outlier or not, but it has to be said that if you take Rawlings away, he is the first candidate to win an election on their first attempt. Right now, in 2024, it appears Bawumia repeats that trend. If you take out Mahama and Rawlings, okay, so as a first-time candidate, he actually repeats what Kufuor suffered, what Mills suffered, what Nana Akufo-Addo suffered. Okay, so it may not be new, but it may also not be the only reason the NPP lost, because there could be other reasons. And I mentioned that if you look at this this chart or this slide, it is significant to drop 2 million votes, especially when you had almost 1.5 million new voters. Okay, so if you compare the 2020 performance and 2024 performance, you notice that in terms of new voters in the registered voters between 2020 and 2024, there were votes for grab, right? But again, a case of new candidates, a case of the economy, performance of the government, apathy, and all those things now leads MPP to drop that 2 million votes. So yes, maybe Bawumia has suffered from that new candidate syndrome, but there could be other factors that affected this loss as well.
Okay, Ben. So in terms of other factors, do you think low turnout plays out here? Because let's keep in mind that 2024 we recorded the lowest voter turnout, which is about 60.9%. What's
Yeah.
really caused this? Do we have the regional basis? Because I keep saying I'm still in shock, but what shocks me the most is Ashanti region, right?
Yeah.
To drop by that much. So let's look at the voter turnout numbers.
Okay, so in terms of the voter turnout, I think I showed you this chart earlier. Okay, so you notice that 2024, again, is the lowest on record. Where are the voters? It's a valid question. People say people stayed at home, people traveled, people were not interested, right? Apathy is apathy, right? It just means that, again, if you are the incumbent, this is likely going to affect you. But case has even been made that even if there was no apathy, we could have been seeing a wider margin. We don't have data to prove that, but these are all scenarios that are possible. Now, if you look at the regional breakdown, okay, the wine color here are the 2024 numbers. You see a significant dip across all the regions, right? So there isn't a single case where a 2024 turnout equals or is higher than the previous one, right? So you can make a case that, 60.9% means potentially 30% of about 18 million people, minus, of course, people who are not alive, are not joining the queue. And if you're an incumbent, this should really be serious, especially if you are riding on free SHS and you expect people who have attended free SHS and their parents to turn up and they don't. Maybe there's some underlying factor. So yes, one of the factors or the reasons could be low turnout that was experienced across the regions.
Okay. Ben, can you quickly walk us through the how the variances look like between 2020 and 2024 for the two major parties, the NPP and the NDC? How are their figures looking on a regional basis?
Okay, so maybe for this one, I'll show you an Excel book. So this data we took from Peace FM Online, and they sought to compare the 2020 and 2024, right? So I mentioned that every region showed a negative variance, right? So if you decide to sort this in 2024, Bono East leads according to the data from that source. Okay, Ashanti region turns up with 62%, but in terms of variance, they drop about 20%. Now, if you look at the denominator here in the Ashanti region, this is significant. Okay, anytime you have turnout flying under 70%, it shows that things are not going to go well, right? Now, you realize that from R4 all the way up, everybody turned up under 70%. Okay. This could probably be the reason why maybe for Northeast, MPP had a little gain. Okay. Because if you look at the Northeast, yes, there was general voter apathy throughout. They generally vote. Okay. But even when they dropped, they were still above 70%. Right. So you will notice that in terms of the variance in valid vote cast, okay, the Northeast 70% plus actually makes them the only region in terms of variance between 2020 and 2024 to record a positive variance for the MPP. Okay, every other region driven by this low voter turnout, right, had a negative or red variance so far as the MPP is concerned, right? So even when Muhammad drops in terms of variance, at least you see mixes of green variance here to stabilize his performance. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the regional turnout looks like anything about 70% works well for the incumbent, but anything flying under 70% doesn't turn out good for the incumbent. So yes, now the regional turnout actually plays a role, especially in the case of the Ashanti region.
Okay, that's interesting to note. Maybe I think we'll pause here and see if there are any questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? If you do, you could just give us a wave and then we'll call you to ask. I don't see anything in the chat box.
So maybe while we wait for the questions, I think one of the things that we wanted to show.
So we'll take some time to go through how. So I'm sure you all know that we have.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. I was saying that I'm sure we all saw the reports we hang on our website, right? So we'll take some few minutes to go through that. But before we go through how that was made, Ben, do you have anything to say? Anyone else have anything to say on what we've discussed so far? How the 2024 figures are looking at the historicals? Anything to add before we zoom into that one? Are you all in shock as I am?
Yeah, good evening. I don't know if I can hear me.
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, my interest is on the voter turnout. You know, as Bernard mentioned, at the end of every 8-year cycle, it normally drops. Now, do we also look at the issue of the when the voter register is compiled, the number of people on the road? You know, sometimes people die and then we go back to update the register and all that. I don't know whether you consider adding that scenario when the register was compiled. Because if a register is probably 6, 7, 8 years old, the number of dead people, all things being equal, would have been higher. So because we are looking at the same denominator against the numerator, we always assume that there's a low voter turnout. I don't know how that will play out anyway. That's my thinking now.
Okay. Before Ben comes in, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for every election cycle, there's a voter
Say that
registration.
again. Sorry, your line was breaking.
Yeah, I'm saying that I'm of the view that for every election cycle, so every 4 years, the register is updated, right? To take off the dead people, to bring in those that just turned 18 and above. There's that, right?
Well, I mean, the EC goes through what it calls continuous registration and then review of the register. But that is separate from what happened after 2016, where there were calls to recompile the register, okay, to remove dead people from it and all that. So yes, I would agree with the earlier comment that maybe one way to also look at it is the effect of the changes in the role. Okay, I know in the analysis we've had the register compiled in between time, but there's an analysis on whether the dead people in the register, in fact, whether if you take them away, it is enough to affect the number of people on the register. Truth is that if you look at this slide, right, in 2020, we have about correct me, but that's 1.7 million. Is that the case? I think I have a slide.
So what are you looking at?
Yeah.
What are you looking at? The difference?
Yes, so let's look at this. Now, this slide shows the percentage of voters over the national population estimate. Okay, so this will give you an idea. Now, we are using the national population estimates from the World Bank because Ghana Statistical Service will do census every 10 years, but because our election is every 4 years, right, we use the blue numbers from the World Bank. So if you take a look on the average, our register is always between like 50 to 55%, okay, of our population. In fairness, that has been consistent. Okay, so if you look at 2000, we have a 54%, right? In 2004, there was a little cleanup. So again, that will probably go to buttress the points that he made. But even that's brought it to about 47% of the estimated population, right? Then in 2008, it goes up again from 10 million to 12 million, okay, which now is 51%. 2012, we go up again by 14%, again, 53% of our total population, right? Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, removing dead people from the register can affect the register, but if you look at it in terms of how it relates to our total population, we are not too far off, especially using that ratio of the total number registered over our population. So we may probably have to dig into that, but I find the number or the ratio relatively stable since 2012.
All right. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Husseini. Do we have any other comments, questions on the discussion so far? Okay, Osbert, please go ahead.
Okay, now thank you very much. I think the story, so far has been brilliant, and I want to congratulate Finex for a session like this. Um, I'm also in a shock now, just as you are. Um, it's also for me boils down to the fact that I think the voter population is getting more enlightened. Policies are more scrutinized, and there's a separation between what is real and what is not real. Okay, information out there on social media also affects the voter turnout and a decision to also vote. All right, so there's a generation that is looking more into the data, analyzing the data, juxtapose what you said before and your deliverables, and and informs them as to make a decision if you can continue or if you can help them. All right, so the economic
Right.
policies are no longer for only a certain preserve of the community, of the Ghanaian community. All right, so the youth are now getting understanding, or they are enlightened now. They can read the economics of things. Okay, they can search for information if they don't understand some economic policies, right? So I also think that also
Right.
affected the voter turnout. That also affected the voting also, and that also went against the incumbent. So they should look at that, in the next coming years or in future, if they still want to get into power. And my other question is, this is very interesting. If Prinex is able to do this analysis, so would there be an opportunity for us who have a relationship with Finex to be able to learn and to develop our skill as to how to do some of this analysis, and as to how to also develop our skills in data storytelling? Thank you.
Right, right. That was a very good submission, and your question actually leads us to our next session, which is how we came about the dashboard that we hang on our website. So let me just leave it to Bernard to walk us through it and also answer your question. So Ben.
Okay, so thank you. Now, again, the objective of this series is again to relate the real stories to what we learn. So we do Power BI, we do business presentations with PowerPoint. So in fact, the slides that you saw were all PowerPoint presentations. The thing is that normally when we are creating PowerPoint designs, we always use a 16:9 layout. But did you know that if you just flip the slide size, okay, and then make it as the same width, in this case 33, right, you get more room, and this layout actually fits most of the social media pages, right? So that is what we have adopted aside the regular 16:9 layout. Okay, now we also used a lot of the colors from the parties, that is the blue and green, to make the story consistent. You also notice that when it comes to data storytelling, it's not just enough presenting the numbers, but the context around the numbers also matters. So going forward, we will be doing more of these series, and then we'll actually have time to walk our viewers through the back end of how we created some of these. Now, I think it's also important to let users know that aside these PowerPoint slides, we've also created an interactive Power BI report. Okay, that's actually re-echoes what we've discussed. previous elections all the way to 2024, right? This is a shape map, right? So shape maps, we've done videos on how to create this using black and white images, using JSON files, okay? As long as the labels in your data match the labels in the JSON files, you can easily map the regions and then put in some measures. In this case, when NPP wins is blue, when NDC wins is green, where they are equal is gray, right? So this is a JSON file that has been used to create this. In the background, PowerPoint is a PowerPoint slide just to enhance, right? But what we did differently was that when you are switching from 2020 to 2024, you notice that Akufo-Addo actually gives way to Bawumia. Okay, so again, we used one visual here, okay, to make this possible. And this is the new card visual, right? So we'll be doing subsequent videos on this. Now the new card visual can actually hold dynamic images. Okay, so in terms of the new elements for our viewers, the JSON file and the new card image are the elements that we used here. Every other thing you see here are your regular visuals and then the shapes, right? If you come to the Parliament view, we use this waffle chart to represent the dots between the MPP and then the NDC. Okay, so this, again, we have a video on this to show you how we created a waffle chart. There's a page on flips and seats that were held. Okay, so here you see the seats that were held by the NDC and the ones that they got. Again, this is a simple matrix visual. Okay, still using the JSON file, we used it to tell this story. Now, when we created this in Power BI, this is the Power BI desktop. If you publish this online, okay, you have the option to embed it online, right? So if you have a blog or you have a website, that is what we have done here, right? So on our website, we now embed that work in here. If you are able to load the data, that is the Excel file that is giving you the data on OneDrive, you should be able to sync the desktop and the web view almost in real time when you refresh. Okay, so because it's the first in the series, this is just to give you an overview of how we put this together. Maybe going forward, we will leave ourselves some time to actually go behind the technical parts and also give our users something to add on to their skills. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bernard. That has been an interesting discussion so far. 1 hour just flew by. But that's what time will allow us for. So Ben, can I make a humble appeal? Could you do a video on this election dashboard and hang it on the YouTube for us? I'm sure the community will agree with me on this. So that's an appeal to you. Okay. So
so we'll work on it.
This okay. Okay, thank you. This is the end of our first episode. We appreciate your audience and for the questions that came in and the contributions. Thank you so much. I also want to say that this is not just a one-time thing. As I said earlier, it's just episode 1. So in 2025, we are looking forward to more episodes coming up, and we hope that you will join us. And in light with that, if you have any topics, anything you want us to discuss, you can reach out to any member of the team, Bernard, me, Daniel, Ferdinand, Osbeth. You can reach out to us with your topics and we'll take that up. So Bernard, I don't know if you have any last comments before we wrap up in some few seconds.
So the last comment is to thank all of us, the team, Daniel, Ferdinand, Ernest, Osbert, the Winger, Priscilla, Daniel, everybody who has contributed to making this possible, and to the entire Finance Skills Hub community. So again, this is the first in the series. Thank you for those who were able to join. We'll post the playback video on our YouTube channel. And then I'm sure if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next series.
Right. Have a good rest of the
Thank you.
Thank you.